Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kay. Today I'm doing a spoilery review for An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. This is a low fantasy / urban fantasy novel from 2017. There was supposed to be a sequel released in June of this year, but probably because of COVID, it's been postponed and there's not a release date that has been announced since. So this, like I said, this was low fantasy. It takes place in New York City, and it's focusing on the unseen world, which is just a community, society of magicians living in New York. Their society is built around these powerful houses, which are in charge of everything. So you have one house that's kind of in charge of everyone, and they make the rules, and you know what they say goes. And then you have all the other houses who have some level of influence. Obviously you have various alliances, you have feuds, you have outright enemies. But by and large, these houses are kind of the old money. They've been around for a long time. They're passed down through the family line usually. And the only way you can get a new house is during what is called the turning, which is where this book opens. It's the start of a new turning. Usually they occur every 20 years or so. In the case of this one, it's only been 13 years since the last turning, possibly due to the fact that magic has started going a little haywire. Things are a little broken. People cast a spell, it doesn't work either at all, or it has some weird consequence and it kind of goes off and does some weird thing no one wanted it to do. So we're having a turning, which I believe is established by the magic, not by the people, because all of the magicians are notified that there's going to be a turning coming. So it's something to do with the magic. It's not made clear in the book how the turning is determined, like what is determining it, but it's not the people involved. So what the turning is just a magical competition between houses, and like I said, this is how you can get new houses. So magicians who are kind of newcomers to the society, to the community, or maybe they belong to another house but they're kind of lower in rank and they want to move up in the world and become influential, become powerful, whatever, they can take this opportunity to establish their own house, and if they win, then their house becomes official and legitimate. I'm not sure, because I can't exactly remember if they can still establish their own house even if they don't win. Not entirely clear because, like I said, it's been a hot minute since I read it and I don't remember that part. But anyway, so our main character is Sydney. She is looking to be the champion for a house. So every house has to have a champion, whether that's someone from within the house, within the family, or just somebody who works for them, or they can hire out and hire someone else to champion for them. This is important because the turning starts out as just a regular competition, who does it better, because it's one-on-one duels, but then at some point then it crosses over into being battles to the death. So some houses maybe don't want to risk their heir dying in one of these duels. So Sydney is our main character. She is looking to be champion. She's going to work for an upstart house. And of course, she has her own reasons, her own agenda for doing this, because she is from what is called the House of Shadows, which is a house but not an official house. It's not acknowledged, and that is where the magicians can get consequence-free magic, because if you use your own innate magic, there is a physical consequence, depending on how big of magic you're trying to do. It can be a headache, a bloody nose, excruciating pain. You can see why this might be inconvenient for rich, entitled, arrogant people. So they have found a workaround by creating the House of Shadows. Each house sacrifices an infant, a child, to the House of Shadows, whether it's their own children or they can buy unwanted magical children, give them to the House of Shadows, and then those children are tortured and siphoned of their magic. Most of them eventually die, and they pretty much never get to leave. And so this kind of creates this little well of magic where the consequences have already been paid. So any house that has made their sacrifice can access this magic consequence-free. It doesn't allow them access to more magic than they would already be able to use. Each person has their own capacity for magic use. It's not determined by bloodline. It's, kind of luck of the draw. Coming from a powerful family does not guarantee you powerful abilities. Sydney happens to be from the House of Shadows. She is one of exactly 2 people who have managed to escape the house, although it's, there are strings attached to that. So she's looking to compete. She's extremely powerful, and our opening scene in the first chapter is her audition to become champion for this house. And let me tell you, that is one of the most beautiful scenes. Like, in my mind, I could picture what was happening, and all I could think was, I hope this gets adapted for like a movie or a TV show or something, because this needs to be on the screen. This scene was written like to be seen. It's very visual. What drew me to this book was the cover, which is gorgeous, and then the idea of these magical duels, which is always exciting. What kept me reading it, though, was not only the duels, but the way that Cat Howard wrote scenes involving magic and made them really come to life in my mind, as well as this kind of interesting moral quandary at the center of the book and at the center of this society. Those are really the things that kind of kept me pushing through this book. So now I'm going to talk about some of the elements of the story. First up is like world building and the magic system. The magic system, like I said, doesn't have a lot of clear rules, other than, they can only use as much magic as they can use, and that's kind of it. There are limits. But as far as like how the magic works and what exactly they can do and the scope of what they can do, boundaries and such, it's not really defined. They just can kind of do magic stuff, which is fine. I don't need a hard, rule-heavy magic system to be able to enjoy it, because some of the scenes of the duels, the imagery there is just beautiful. Like I said, there are some scenes in this book that I feel like would translate exceedingly well onto the screen. For the world building, there are interesting parallels between how this society works and how our society works. You see a lot of older white guys in charge of things, and that's how they like it. People of color and women fare less better. You get the occasional woman in charge. One of the main houses that figure in the story is House Prospero, and it is currently run by a woman, but I believe it's only because her husband died. So if he was still alive, he'd be the one running the house, but he died at the last turning. So now Miranda Prospero is in charge. But by and large, it's a gentleman's club. And with that, it's kind of, like I said, the old money attitude. These houses have been around for a long time. They've had influence, they've had power for a long time, and they're willing to do terrible things to stay in power. Moving on to the characters, you have Sydney, who is our main character, main protagonist. Like I said, she's from the House of Shadows. I felt like she was a well-rounded character. She's extremely powerful, which is a bit of a ding, because I feel like in a lot of cases she's overpowered. No one really poses any sort of challenge to her throughout the duels that she's in, even at the end with the big climax, and she faces a couple people, and no one's really, it's not really a contest at all. Some of that's explained because, she spent her whole life being tortured for her magic, so pain is an old friend for her, and so she has, through that, gained a large amount of control over her body and her mind, which I think has allowed then for a greater capacity for doing magic, because she can handle the consequences better than pretty much anybody else. But yeah, she is a little overpowered. That was kind of I would have liked to have seen some sort of, stumble, some sort of challenge for her, that she actually really had to work for it. Unfortunately, she never really did. You have three semi-antagonists. There's not really a villain in this story. The real villain, the real main antagonistic force here is the structure of this society and the length people are willing to go to and the atrocities people are willing to ignore to maintain their pain-free magic use. That's really the main antagonistic element in this book. So there's not really a person for her to vie against. I mean, there's a couple of small ones. You have Grey Prospero, who is a serial killer. You have the head of House Merlin, I think his name is Miles, who is an old man who has jeopardized everyone and magic as a whole just so he can stay in power and not lose his magic, as sometimes happens in old age. So he's willing to have everyone else pay the price so that he doesn't fall out of power. And then you have Shara, who is the head of House Shadows, and she wants House Shadows brought out into the light and to, have it recognized by the rest of society and all that good stuff. And so she's kind of an antagonistic force towards Sydney because she holds Sydney under her sway still. But like I said, that you don't get a clear villain, which is fine, but I like a nice villain. But Grey in particular is interesting because he does heinous things. I mean, he kills women to steal their magic because he was injured, and that's the only way he can get magic now. So he kills women who are vulnerable, who are not super powerful. That way he can easily subdue them. And he cuts out their finger bones and then leaves them lay in the middle of the park or lay in an alley or whatever, and he just leaves them behind like trash. So does despicable things, but he's really not powerful. He's not an intimidating type of person. He's very entitled and selfish. He's kind of a brat. He has illusions of grandeur. He thinks he's, super clever and, everything he deserves to have things because he's been disinherited from House Prospero, but he deserves it. That's his right. And so it's kind of an interesting thing to see a character who might otherwise have just been like, ooh, scary, he's a serial killer, to see that really he's this weak person. And so that, I think, I applaud Cat Howard for that characterization in particular. You do have a couple characters who do not agree with the way that society works. You have Ian, I think his name is Ian Merlin, who is kind of a love interest, but he is also disinherited himself from House Merlin because he doesn't agree with the House of Shadows, which House Merlin established. They're the ones who came up with this whole idea as a workaround. And he doesn't agree, so he disinherited himself. He taught himself how to use his own magic so that he's not involved in any of that anymore. And then you have Laurent, I think. He is the head of this upstart house that Sydney works for. He seems, by all means, to be a good guy. He's trying to win so that he can change how society works and make it more open to people so that it's not so members only. Because he came from a non-magical family and had to kind of work his way into the world, and he's still not respected. He's still, not accepted by anyone. So that's also kind of an interesting character. I'm looking forward to seeing how some of these side characters are developed later. In particular, Laurent, because he was best friends with Grey Prospero. He didn't know what Grey was up to. But that was his first friend in the magical world. And then I'd like to see where he's at. Sydney did win, so he should be in charge. His house is in charge. It would be nice to see kind of what changes that he has brought about and what changes kind of all of them have brought about after the events of this book. Then you have the plot itself. I thought the plot was very action-driven. I read this book in a day. It's 350-ish pages, but it just drives you because it is this magical competition. So you're going from kind of duel to duel, and you get these little kind of side steps where Sydney maybe goes back to the House of Shadows and some more information is, revealed along the way. You get the bits about Grey, and things start coming together. But what's really driving you is Sydney and her quest to, defeat all of these houses in order to gain her freedom and turn the magical world on its head. So to me, the plot worked out. I didn't have any serious problems with it. I didn't find any glaring plot holes, which is good. This is not necessarily a book that's character driven, although you do have some strong characters and some interesting characters. I think it's definitely very action driven. So I guess if you prefer more of a character driven book, this might not be the one for you. And then a word on the writing. This, like I said, I read it in a day, 350 pages. It's very comfortable writing. It reminds me a little bit of how YA can read, where you can just like devour page after page in one sitting. But not to say that it's simplistic or anything, because like I also said, there are some scenes that it's like, wow, these are like, I'm getting mental imagery here of just amazing magic, and some sections are very kind of descriptive and without being over the top, without going into like purple prose or anything. It's just you get a very visceral sense of the scene, and that to me was also one of the driving forces, is just coming across, especially whenever magic was being used, the way she wrote about the magic and what was happening, what the magic was doing, was very compelling. I didn't find anything distracting about it. Sometimes you get, authors who are kind of repetitive in their word usage or whatever. I didn't have any of those problems reading this. It was, like I said, it was just a very, very quick read. Read it in, if it wasn't one sitting, it was definitely just in like one day. My rating for this book was a 4-star for my gut check. Like as soon as I'm done reading, kind of gut check rating, it was a 4-star, very enjoyable. After I sat with it for a few days and kind of thought about all the different things, I settled on an 8. The ending was a little weak for my taste. The climax I don't think was climactic enough. You're kind of building up to this showdown or whatever at the end, and it's, for all the marbles, and Sydney immediately kills Grey Prospero because he's pathetic, and then Cher shows up and she easily dispatches her as well. Sacrifices her magic to save everybody else, because that's what Sydney does. And then Sydney, as a consequence, has no magic. The end. Our protagonists don't face any real consequences, aside from Sydney losing her magic, which I feel like is going to be, the X-Men 3, where Magneto has no magic, but at the very end you see him like wiggle the chess piece. I feel like in the sequel, Sydney's gonna get her magic back. I like some death. I like injury. Something that's like, yes, we went through this. It got a little crazy for a minute. There were losses. There was some sort of consequence to what we were doing here. And then we came out the other side. And I didn't really get that with this book. That was kind of the only main downer for me. Also not having a super clear villain other than society, and their, and the lengths they are willing to go to. You don't get a person to root against. You don't have someone that your protagonist is focused on defeating, which it worked and it's fine, because the actual antagonistic element of this society is interesting enough to carry it, but it would have been nice for maybe Cher to play a larger role or something, to be more difficult for Sydney to defeat. She goes in and flattens the House of Shadows relatively easily towards the end of the book, and I just would have liked to see something be more challenging for her. So that's why it's an 8 instead of like a 9 or a 10. But overall, it was a really enjoyable book. I feel like it was very well written. It was sound. There weren't any huge plot holes or stumbling blocks that pulled me out while I was reading it. Like I said, I read it in a day. So anything that I can just devour that quickly and not have any major complaints, other than a few little personal preference issues, is going to get a big check mark and a star for me. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for sticking around. Comment down below and let me know if you have read this book and what you thought of it. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!